Hey, and welcome back to, you guessed it, Workshop Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today in my workshop. I'm Chelsea Bussemeyer, and before we launch into today's topic, I have a super exciting announcement for you, and that is this Friday. I've booked off my entire schedule so that you can book a 15-minute one-on-one consultation with me where we can talk about everything sewing garment related and what's not working for you. If you've ever wished that you could, ask me a question face to face about what you're working on, or you've wanted to come to live classes that I've offered, that's what this consultation is about. It's to connect with you, to make sure that you get in the class that's going to really get you from where you are now to where you want to be. And so this is your opportunity to book this free, no obligation class to find out more about the virtual classes that I teach and have that one-on-one time to ask me sewing questions. So pop down in the description box right now and book that call before my Friday fills up, and get a time that works for you, and I look forward to seeing you then. Now, our topic today is elastics, replacing elastics, and my top tips. Elastics wearing out before your garment does is super common just because the delicate nature of the fiber. It can't handle heat as well, so any kind of, drying, hot water, and it just ages much quicker. So I've got this project today, and I've got a couple other examples here. First of all, I wanted to just look at the different methods and techniques that are used for sewing in elastics. I've looked at this pants here and noticed that the elastic is actually sewn into the seam where the waistband is attached, as well as it's top stitched through, creating this piping for the drawstring. So thankfully, I don't need to replace this elastic because this would be a lot more work, just because I need to unstitch both of the layers of top stitching and totally remove the waistband, unless I wanted to make it a little easier on myself and possibly just open up all of the layers in a small section. I could slide a smaller elastic possibly through this middle section, something like that, to kind of work around it. There's also elastics like this one where the elastic is actually sewn on the outside, and you can see here this elastic is completely shot. I'll be doing this one another day. It's simply stitched on here with a cover stitch, 3 needle wide cover stitch, and this one will just have to be unstitched and a new one stitched back on. And then we've got elastics like this one in the cuff of this jacket where we have a tube of piping here, and the elastic is fed through. However, it's important to check in with the project, especially if you didn't make it, to just see how was this elastic put in the first place. Sometimes, as we saw with the jeans, it's stitched in along the edge, so you really just can't even remove the old elastic, and sometimes it'll actually be closed in the seam. So if there's a seam running into the piping, the elastic will be, added before they fold it over the flap, and it will be stitched in, so you won't be able to remove it. So first things first, we need to kind of just open up the casing here and see if our elastic is actually loose within the garment, or if it is stitched in any way, shape, or form. So I'm just going to get my little snips and open up a small section of stitching here. Okay, now that we can see kind of inside the piping, I can just pull on this elastic. It is really short, and see, is it attached or is it not attached? Oh, what a lucky day we have here. It's not attached at all to the seam, so it's simply fed through and stitched to itself. So being that this elastic is entirely loose within the piping, I can simply cut it and pull it out and then put in a new elastic. If it wouldn't want to come out, then that would be kind of my cue for knowing that it's attached right at the seam. I didn't want to open it up right at the seam just because this is pretty thick for sewing over. So if I didn't have to stitch over that area, then I wanted to kind of avoid that. It looks like they might have caught it somewhere. Sometimes that happens if they've put the elastic in before they've closed the piping or the tubing, it is caught. So I can just kind of slide it around and see, oh, it's letting go. So it must have just caught by a hair. So there we go. So the elastic is entirely removed. So next we've got to look at what kind of elastic we'd want to replace it with. Looking at the size of the elastic that was originally in there is a way to kind of gauge and pick a correct size elastic. What you want to make sure though, if you don't have elastic, if you're making maybe something new, or if you're wanting to know, is this elastic going to work if it's a little different than your original one, is look at how big it is compared to the size of the casing. You want it to be slightly smaller. This is about maybe like a 1/4 of an inch smaller. If the fabric is bulkier, you'll want to have a little bit more of a buffer. If it's very fine and thin, then you could possibly go closer to the size of your casing. But what will happen if your elastic is too narrow and you've got kind of too much overhang, larger than the elastic, is it's going to flop around. Your elastic is going to just have more ability to move and twist, and it's not going to lay as nicely in the band, in the piping itself. Now, if your elastic is too wide, if you've picked something that's, you know, bordering on too thick or too wide, then it's possibly going to bend and kind of bow as it's fed through, especially if you have a bulky stiff fabric that can easily bend your elastic. And then it's also not going to lay flat. It'll just be kind of lumpy and bumpy. And so we really want to make sure that the elastic can pass through easily and isn't too big and isn't too small. So lucky enough, I've got this piece of elastic in my elastic box, and it is exactly the right size that if I cut it in two, I can make the cuff for both sides. Now, since that elastic is totally shot already, I don't know how small the cuff was. So look at the size of the garment. This is a smaller kind of ski jacket. So it's going to be worn by people that are, you know, a little bit more slim and trim. So they'll have skinnier wrists, skinnier hands, but you want to make sure that whatever part of the body it's going to be going over or going through, you can easily kind of get in and out, and know that your casing is going to add some bulk. So if you can go really easily through the elastic, then you're good, because even with the extra bulk of the casing, it's not going to get too tight. But if you're finding, oh, it's barely big enough to stretch over whatever part of the body, whether it's a waistband or whatever it is right now, then it might get a little tight by the time you've got the fabric of the garment around it. Next step is super simple and straightforward. We've just got to feed it through and stitch the ends together and close it back up. So this is an oldie but a goldie method. I'm just gonna use this safety pin to help me slide it around. Be careful when you're going also through areas that have a seam. If the seam allowance is the direction, facing the direction you're going, sometimes your pin will get stuck in between the seam allowance and the garment. So you'll just need to back up a little bit and then try and find the hole. I find if I bend the tube or the piping so that it kind of opens up in the middle, then I can kind of fish my safety pin through, which makes it much easier. The other thing about feeding an elastic that you might not think about but can really cause a problem is really make sure that your elastic is flat and not twisted in your piping. It's easier than you think to get twisted as you're feeding it through, but you really don't want to connect your ends and have a twist in your elastic, or even if it twists and goes back to being flat, it can be really frustrating after you've closed everything up. I'm also just going to take a pin here and pin my end right to the garment so that it doesn't slip inside and disappear as I'm feeding it through, because that's also a super frustrating thing that can easily happen when you're feeding in your new elastic. So once again, you want to double check that you don't have any twists in your elastic. I've got both my ends here, and I'm just going to quickly stitch them together and close it up. Here we go. One side done, then I just need to repeat those steps on the second side. The other tip I wanted to give you that I thought of while I was at my machine is sometimes when the elastic is stitched into the seam, it's easier to just leave in the original elastic and run a new piece kind of on top. The only thing is sometimes you can run into the trouble that it's actually closed and it's not really a tube all the way around anymore, but when they sewed in that elastic at the seam, they also closed the piping. And that's most often when the seam allowance is exposed, which is easier to take it apart, but sometimes it'll be closed up even on the inside. So opening it up right around the seam area if your elastic isn't entirely loose is really helpful just to see what was the original kind of construction process and how can you most quickly and easily get a new elastic in that cuff. Okay, so what have we learned today? Well, one, always do your recon. Look at the method, how the elastic was installed, and decide if that's the easiest way to go about getting a new one in or if you want to adjust something. Two, always make sure that your elastic is suited to the garment and what it's used for and the right size. And three, well, there wasn't really a three except even when you're mending, have fun with it, because hey, at least you're sewing. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Workshop Wednesday. Do pop down to the comments and book that one-on-one consultation if there are any left, as I'd love to help you out with whatever it is. If you've ever thought, oh, I wish I could just chat with Chelsea in person, this is your opportunity to do it totally free and ask your questions. Even if you're working on a project right now and you'd like to ask me what I would do with that situation, bring it to our one-on-one, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. If you're already a student, then I'll see you live in class or next week on Workshop Wednesday. Until then, take care and happy sewing.